The boardroom was silent, silent enough to hear the tension breathing between gold-trimmed walls and glass reflections. The silence shattered when the check hit John's face. A crisp envelope, white, embossed, $5 million. "I've made it easy for you," Sophia said, her voice sharp, like the heels echoing across the marble. "This marriage was always strategic. You knew that. Now we're done. No hard feelings." John didn't speak, not even a twitch. Across from him, Sophia sat like a queen on her boardroom throne, flanked by legal advisors and her smirking secretary, Ryan, who leaned too comfortably against the wall, arms crossed, sleeves rolled up like he'd won something. The room was full of people, executives, legal heads, interns pretending not to stare, but Sophia made the announcement like a headline: "Our 2-year alliance is officially over. John has been compensated generously." A few chuckles, some forced nods, and one audible gasp when John picked up a pen. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at Ryan. He didn't even blink as he signed the papers with perfect, rehearsed precision. The same signature he'd once used on the loan documents that saved her company from going under. 2 years ago, when creditors circled Sophia's empire like vultures, John had walked in with quiet eyes and a funeral insurance check from his late parents. No hesitation, no strings, no prenup. He had offered her stability when she was sinking. She had offered him a contract marriage in return. Now she offered $5 million. John pressed the pen down one last time. The divorce was official. "That's it?" Ryan asked, voice dripping in smugness. "No grand speech, no breakdown, at least cry a little, man." John stood, still no words. He adjusted the sleeves of his black dress shirt, simple, threadbare at the cuffs, unlike the luxury suits around him, and looked at the check once more. $5 million was generous for betrayal, generous for a placeholder, generous for a ghost. But in Sophia's world, everything had a price tag, even silence. He folded the check slowly, neatly, and placed it inside his coat pocket. Then he reached for the other thing he'd kept on him all these years. A soft, worn notebook, brown leather, cracked at the edges. His father's writing still lived inside. Grocery lists, quotes from old philosophers, a sketch of the childhood home they'd lost to debt. John turned to leave. His steps didn't echo, his exit didn't warrant applause, but everyone noticed that he didn't glance back, not even once. Sophia watched him go, unreadable. She had expected resistance, tears, anger, something. Not this eerie calm. Ryan leaned in toward her and whispered, "Guess he finally got the memo." But John wasn't gone. Not really. He took the private elevator, rode it down 58 floors, stepped into the dusk of the city. He could still hear her voice from the boardroom, calculated, cold, full of power, the same voice that used to tremble when she whispered that she needed him. He pulled the train ticket from his wallet. One way. Back to the countryside station that hadn't seen him in 5 years, where his parents were buried, where the soil still remembered him. A black cab pulled up. He didn't pause, not for the skyline, not for the tower that had once been saved in his name, not for the woman who had signed him away like a vendor. He got into the cab, holding only 3 things: a divorce check, a worn notebook, and the ticket to the life he had sacrificed. Sophia had dismissed him publicly, but John had decided his worth privately, long ago. She thought she ended it, but he was just beginning. The countryside wasn't quiet, it breathed, birds cried in the trees like arguments. The wind creaked through broken wood beams, whispering forgotten names. The earth under John's boots wasn't polished marble, it was honest, cracked, alive. He stood before the decaying house. Slate roof half gone, walls streaked with rain and moss. The fence tilted like an old man trying to stay proud. The garden, once a sea of persimmons and tea roses, had grown wild. But this house didn't betray him, not like people did. He set his bag down, nothing designer, just a canvas duffel and one folded jacket. Inside were 3 things: the check Sophia threw at his face, his parents' leather-bound notebook, and a printed spreadsheet of passive income from Blue Sky Systems, the tech firm he'd silently backed during the crypto crash. He could have stayed in the city. He could have moved to a penthouse 10 blocks from Sophia's firm and outbid her for every building she set eyes on. But he didn't. That wasn't his war. His war was peace. He opened the rusted gate with both hands, mindful of the vines. Stepping into the broken front porch, he breathed in the dust and rot and memory. And for the first time in years, his chest didn't feel tight. The city had carved him into a ghost. Here, he could breathe again. The repairs took weeks. He didn't hire contractors, he bought tools. He patched the roof one panel at a time, kneeling under the sun, hands blistered, shirt clinging to his back. He planted rows of lettuce and herbs in the old garden plot. He cleaned the rust from the kitchen faucet and replaced the pipes himself. There was no audience, no praise. But every screw he turned, every floorboard he repaired, every vegetable sprouting from dirt, felt more real than anything Sophia ever gave him. She had given him power in name only. A husband on paper. A silent shadow by her side. In her world, love was currency, and John had always known the price. Flashback, 2 years ago. Sophia in the corner of a dim restaurant, head buried in trembling hands. The headlines behind her screamed collapse. Sinclair Holdings crashes, 32% overnight. Her voice had cracked as she said, "I need time, protection, a front." John had said, "I'll wire the money tomorrow." She blinked. He wasn't rich then, just smart. He'd sold a tech patent and lived modestly. The funeral payout from his parents had been sitting untouched for years. He offered it to her. No contract, no conditions. So she made one. A contract marriage, strategic, mutually beneficial. He'd get her legal protection, she'd give him legitimacy in elite circles. A fake love story, sealed with camera flashes and cold dinners. It was supposed to be business, until she began texting Ryan, until her office door began closing behind them. Until John learned what it felt like to be used, not once, but methodically, like a pawn moved square by square until sacrificed. He never confronted her. He didn't need to. Because he'd already begun preparing his exit. He'd invested his small savings in undervalued firms. Sat in silence during board meetings and listened more than he spoke, tracked the markets when she thought he was asleep. Sophia thought he was a background character. But John was building an empire in the shadows. And now, it was just him, the birds, and the land. Each morning started with watering the garden, fixing leaks, and reviewing reports from his financial advisor via slow village internet. He smiled when he saw the new numbers. He didn't need Sophia's 5 million. He had 50 well. But she didn't know that, and she never would, because to her, he was still that quiet, obedient man who signed contracts without reading them. The same man who watched her flirt with Ryan and said nothing. Let her believe that, let the world believe that. He had nothing to prove anymore. Yet there was one shadow that never left. Deborah. Years ago, before Sophia's empire, before the contract marriage, there was Deborah. They worked in the same publishing company. She had soft eyes, earth-colored scarves, and a way of listening that made you feel seen. John had thought, maybe, something real was forming. Until Sophia showed up. Sinclair Holdings had just entered publishing, and Sophia had been assigned as a temporary consultant. She swept through the office like wind in glass, loud, sharp, dangerous. She took over departments. Then she took John, with charm, with attention, with her signature seduction, a crisis disguised as vulnerability. "Help me," she'd whispered. "Just for a while." By the time Deborah realized what had happened, it was too late. Sophia made John hers, not out of love, but out of control. And John let it happen. Back in the countryside, he sometimes caught himself staring at the rain on the glass and thinking of Deborah. The way she used to bring him ginger tea, the way she used to scold him for forgetting lunch. The way she left, wordlessly, the moment Sophia moved into his life like a storm. He never chased Deborah. He was too ashamed. But now, as he sat under the repaired roof with a steaming bowl of cabbage stew and the stars blinking above, he wondered if that door might still be open. Meanwhile, in the city, Sophia stood in her penthouse, walls of glass offering her the skyline like a trophy. Ryan was asleep on the couch, half drunk. She didn't look at him. She looked at her phone, no new messages, not from John, not from the man she thought she'd dismissed. Like a clerk. She scrolled through the headlines. No word of him, no drama, no revenge, just absence. And that unsettled her more than any outburst ever could. The man who used to sit at her dinners in silence had vanished, and in his silence now was power. Back in the village, John closed his laptop. The day's reports were solid, his farm was thriving, his garden had bloomed early, and tomorrow, he'd build the fence. It started with a crash, not thunder, not a storm, but the violent splinter of old wood, breaking against steel boots. John dropped the spade in his hand. The front gate, once freshly repaired, now hung sideways, splintered like a snapped promise. And standing in its shadow, framed by the last blush of twilight, was Deborah. Only it wasn't her, not the Deborah he remembered. This version of her had fire in her veins and a war in her eyes. Shoulder-length hair now tied in a tight knot, glasses gone, a trench coat slung over one arm like she had just stormed out of a conference. Her boots were stained with mud, her hand held a near-empty wine bottle. And her eyes? They burned. "You think you can just disappear?" she spat. "Like I was a spreadsheet you closed?" John stood frozen, his mouth opened, closed, but no sound. She took 2 more staggering steps forward. "You don't write, you don't call, after everything? I didn't think you—" he began. "Wanted to see you again?" she snapped. "Congratulations, you were right." She swayed. The bottle slipped from her fingers and shattered beside the well. The same well where, years ago, John had once fished out her dropped sketchbook during an office picnic. She had laughed back then. Tonight, she collapsed. Right into his arms. Her body went limp, her forehead burned with fever, her coat reeked of city rain, cheap perfume, and heartbreak. John stared down at her, this woman who had once felt like home, and cursed silently. Not tonight, not now. But he carried her inside anyway. She woke up on his sofa, hair damp with sweat, her boots neatly placed beside a fire-lit mat. The room smelled of ginger tea and fresh linen. John was at the far end, folding blankets. "You brought me here?" she asked, voice dry. "You collapsed." She blinked, touched her forehead, then shot up. "You undressed me. You were burning up. I removed your coat. No thing else." Silence. Thick, tense. She looked down, still wearing her blouse, though wrinkled, still wearing her pants. But it didn't stop the anger boiling in her. "Isn't this convenient?" she sneered. "I drink, I collapse, you get to play the savior again." John's eyes narrowed. "I'm not playing anything." "You always play, John." She rose to her feet. "You play the martyr, the investor, the quiet, humble man who sacrifices everything but disappears when things get real." He flinched. "You helped me once," she continued. "Years ago. When I was choking under debt and the academic board wanted me gone. You bailed me out. Then you vanished. No explanation, no goodbye. Like I was a project you'd finished." Her voice cracked, but her stance didn't. "And now look at you. Out here in the countryside, brooding in silence, pretending you don't care while you collect pity like it's currency." John's jaw tightened. "You think I'm pretending? I think you don't even know what caring looks like anymore." That hit harder than he expected. He turned toward the window, where the garden shimmered under moonlight. The same garden he'd planted by hand. The same land that never asked for explanations or apologies. Deborah's voice softened. Just barely. "Why didn't you tell me?" He didn't turn. "I thought, you'd be better without me." Silence. Then she laughed, bitter, cold, shaky. "You know what's worse than heartbreak, John? Being forgotten without even the dignity of a reason." His head dropped, but then, so did her defenses. She moved toward the fireplace and slumped onto the floor, pulling the blanket over her knees. "I didn't come here to scream," she said after a while. "I came because I thought I could forgive you. But looking at you now—" She turned her eyes to him. "You're still halfway gone." He didn't reply. She rose again, this time slower. Measured. And she said it like a declaration. "I came here to return the favor." He blinked. "You once saved me," she said. "Now I'm staying." "Deborah." "No." Her voice cut him. "No deals. No contracts. No escape plans." She walked to the door, paused, then turned. This time, I'm managing you. By the second week, John no longer recognized his own home. The once muted walls now wore pastel curtains, his old creaking bed had been replaced with a memory foam mattress wrapped in new ivory sheets. A bookshelf, once buried in dust, was now alphabetized by Deborah and color-coded for her own sanity. And taped across every flat surface were planting schedules, meal plans, chore rotations. Who even prints calendars anymore? John muttered one morning, staring at the laminated chart above the kitchen sink. Deborah walked by, coffee in hand, towel around her hair. People who care about order, you should try it sometime. He scoffed. This is a farm, not a military camp. It was a disaster zone before I came, she replied sweetly, sipping. That week, he woke up before sunrise. Not because he wanted to, but because Deborah had set 3 alarms outside his door, each louder than the last. Her handwritten note beside them read, "Rise and till, or sleep and rot, your choice, Farmer Moody." So he rose, tilled, resented every second of it. She met him outside in boots too clean for real work and a clipboard too serious for vegetables. Tomatoes go in row A, spinach row B, carrots in raised beds only. You made blueprints for carrots. Yes, unlike your chaotic method of vibes and hopes. He gritted his teeth. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Deborah smiled, immensely. By day, they clashed. She labeled spice jars and yelled when he misplaced cumin for cinnamon. He hid her clipboards under piles of laundry just to watch her spiral. She banned instant noodles. He snuck them in like contraband. But by night, everything changed. One evening, under the sprawling grapevine, they shared a pot of corn soup. Deborah sat barefoot, hair down, her coat draped over her lap. John poured the soup carefully, the steam curling between them. Neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was settled, like something finally finding where it belonged. Later that night, John passed her workspace on the way to the kitchen. She sat hunched over her laptop, the glow of the screen painting shadows across her cheekbones. Her glasses were back, slipping down her nose, a half-drunk mug sat cold beside her. Without thinking, he placed a fresh cup of chamomile on the desk. She looked up, startled. Their eyes met. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. And neither of them spoke of the way her hand lingered near his for just a second too long. One evening, it rained. Hard. The roof rattled. The garden puddled. And Deborah, stubborn as always, insisted on finishing her academic report by the fireplace. John watched from the kitchen as she typed furiously, fingers moving like storm winds. He made tea. 10 minutes later, he peeked again, and froze. Deborah was slumped sideways, glasses askew, laptop still open. Asleep. He didn't call her name. Instead, he picked up the plaid blanket from the couch and walked slowly, quietly to her. She stirred faintly when the blanket touched her shoulders, but didn't wake. Her face, without tension, without words, was softer than he remembered, younger, sadder. He stood there too long. By the third week, the house didn't feel like his anymore. It felt like theirs. And that terrified him. Because every time Deborah brushed past him in the hallway, every time her laughter echoed in the kitchen, every time he saw her shoes beside his at the door, he felt something dangerous. Hope. He crushed it fast. He told himself this was temporary, that she was brilliant, far too brilliant for someone like him. That one day, she'd be called back to the city, to bigger things, to her world of conferences, lectures, accolades, and when that day came, she'd leave. Like Sophia, like everyone, so he built walls, again. When she laughed too freely, he turned away. When her hand brushed his while handing him tea, he moved too fast. When she asked if he ever missed anyone, he replied, no. He fought every impulse to reach out, to stay longer in the room, to memorize her voice when she read aloud from her journal. Because if he let himself fall again, this time, he wouldn't survive the break. But Deborah noticed. She saw the stiffness in his shoulders. The way he avoided her gaze when their fingers accidentally touched. The way he never looked directly at her when she smiled. One night, as they sat on the porch beneath the stars, she whispered, "You keep trying to pretend I'm not here." He didn't respond. Why? He swallowed, hard. Because I don't want to need you, he said quietly. She turned her face away. You already do. Neither said a word after that. The stars kept shining, but something fragile had cracked wide open between them. The rain started as a whisper. A soft drizzle against the wooden roof, a lullaby on tin and stone. But within hours, it became war. Thunder cracked the sky open like a curse. Wind tore branches from the trees, and by nightfall, the village was drowning in mud and darkness. John stood by the window, flashlight in hand, jaw tight. The hillside's too soft. If it slips, Aunt Wu's house is right below it. Deborah looked up from the fireplace, already halfway into her coat. Then we go. We? He grabbed her arm. The road's caved in, trees are down, it's suicide out there. She pulled her boots on. So we let her die because it's inconvenient? He hesitated. She didn't. She slammed the door behind her. Time passed like smoke in the wind. John paced. He tried to call, no signal. Tried to drive, the mud had swallowed the truck wheels. So he waited. Each thunderclap felt like punishment. Every second stretched, sharpened, bled. Until headlights broke the dark. And there she was. Deborah, drenched, hair plastered to her face, one sleeve torn, the other missing entirely, barefoot, eyes wild. Behind her, Aunt Wu, wrapped in a blanket, clutching her arm like salvation. John ran forward. Deborah, I'm fine, she gasped, collapsing against the truck. Check on her. He did. Rushed Aunt Wu inside, called the local medic, lit every candle in the house. Only when Aunt Wu was warm, safe, and sleeping in the guest room, did he turn back to Deborah. She was sitting on the porch steps. Mud streaked down her cheeks, mixing with tears, or maybe just rain. He crouched beside her, and for the first time since their reunion, he reached for her hand. Why would you do that? She didn't answer. She just leaned her head against his shoulder, and he let her. They drove to the local hospital in the morning, just for checkups. Deborah had bruises, maybe a sprain. Aunt Wu needed observation. John held Deborah's hand in the waiting room. He didn't care who saw, but then, she walked in. The doors slammed open like a bad omen. Sophia, in a soaked designer trench, heels caked with mud, mascara streaking like war paint. Her umbrella lay broken in her hand, as useless as the lies she used to tell. She looked at John, then at Deborah, then exploded. Oh, this is where you've been hiding? John stood slowly. Sophia. She marched forward. You disappeared for this? This rural maid you picked up like a stray dog? Deborah stood too, calm, cold, dignified. John tried to speak, but Deborah placed a hand on his chest, softly pushing him back. I'm not the one who needs defending. Sophia turned to her. Who even are you? Some desperate ex crawling back for table scraps? Deborah's voice was ice. No, I'm the woman who buried her pride long ago, the one who watched from the sidelines while you turned loyalty into leverage. Sophia blinked. Deborah stepped closer. You want to talk desperation? Let's talk about your company hemorrhaging investors. Let's talk about your ex-secretary Ryan and the offshore accounts he used your signature to authorize. Sophia's mouth opened, but no sound came. Deborah continued, voice low but cutting. The board knows. The media will too. You're drowning, Sophia, and the man you threw away, he already learned how to breathe underwater. Gasps echoed from the nearby nurses. Sophia staggered back as if slapped. She turned to John. You let her speak to me like this? He looked her in the eye and said nothing. Sophia's lip trembled, then she turned and ran. Her heels echoed like a retreat. That night, silence returned, but it wasn't empty, it was full of everything unspoken. John sat beside Deborah by the fireplace, their hands brushing once, twice, until they didn't need to move away anymore. Because tonight, no one was pretending. Not anymore. The door didn't even creak when it opened this time. John looked up from the tomatoes he was chopping. Deborah stood in the entryway, bag slung over one shoulder, expression defiant. I'm back. He blinked. You were never invited. I brought honey. She held up a jar smugly. And I replaced the light in the pantry, again. He set the knife down with a sigh. We talked about this. You monologued. I ignored. She walked in like she owned the place. He followed her with his eyes, watched as she kicked her muddy shoes off near the doorway, shrugged off her sweater, and immediately opened the fridge like it was hers, because it was. At least now, it felt that way. The war resumed. A ridiculous, chaotic, strangely beautiful war. She hated how he watered the vegetables at noon instead of early morning. He hated her soy sauce obsession when cooking meat. She said he sulked too much. He said she stomped like a horse. One morning, she rewired the shower head without telling him. He came out spluttering from a freezing spray. That evening, he nailed her laminated schedule to the barn door. She retaliated by drawing devil horns on his childhood photo and taping it to the fridge. "You are the most infuriating woman I have ever. Say it again and I'll build a second bathroom and lock you out of both." But somewhere between the bickering, he began waking earlier, just to watch her tie her hair in the mirror. She began cooking simpler meals because he smiled more with his mouth full. He fixed the attic leaks at night while she worked downstairs. She started washing his clothes without asking. And one night, as they sat at the dinner table in silence, sharing pickled radishes and miso soup, John realized something terrifying. Peace had started to look like her. It all boiled over one evening. A late-night argument about debt. It started small, a joke about who owed who for the ensoal. "You heater." But it spiraled. "You think money fixes things," she snapped, slamming her cup down. He frowned. "No, I think it prevents problems." She stood. "It doesn't, it just changes the flavor of the pain." "And what flavor is this?" he asked, voice low. "Bitter," she whispered, "because you never let anyone in." He stood too. "I let you in." "No, John, you let me help you, then you left. You always leave before it gets too real." His eyes burned. "I left because I thought I'd poison your future." She froze. He took a step closer, voice trembling. "You were brilliant, Deborah. I was just a shadow, broken, angry, and already halfway gone. I didn't want to be the thing that held you back. And what if I wanted to be held?" Her voice cracked. She stared at him. "I wasn't asking for perfection, John. I was asking for you. I thought I'd ruin you. You were the seed of me." Silence. It pressed into the space between them, thick with unsaid memories. Then, slowly, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped forward, into him. Her forehead rested against his chest. His hands trembled as they came to rest at her waist. No words now, just breath, shared, heavy, real. Then she looked up, and kissed him. Not like in stories, not crashing and breathless. But slow, earned. A soft meeting of two people who had broken, healed, grown, and found each other again, not by accident, but by choice. Their lips met, and stayed. A union of equals. Of quiet power and patient strength. Of wounds kissed, not hidden. Tomorrow, finally allowed to begin. 5 years later. The house didn't groan anymore when the wind passed through. Instead, it breathed. There was life here now, rich, sun-dappled, loud and often sticky with jam stains and muddy shoes. The courtyard had transformed, rows of sunflowers leaned over smiling marigolds, a grapevine curled above a wooden bench where a child's drawing was pinned with a clothespin. Tomatoes dangled plump on the vine. A small lemon tree stood proudly in the center. Deborah had named it Professor Yellow. Inside the house, the air was filled with overlapping sounds, piano scales being mangled, a kettle whistling too long, someone yelling, "Tom, not with your feet." John stood in the kitchen, slicing peaches. He was still the same man, broad shoulders, quiet posture, but the lines at the corners of his eyes came from smiling now, not sleepless regret. He watched through the window as a small boy in green overalls ran in crooked zigzags across the garden, chasing a butterfly and yelling nonsense. "Pinion. Ma, the bug's learning characters better than me." Deborah didn't look up from her laptop. Maybe because the bug doesn't skip stroke order. Tom pouted dramatically. "Even Dad said strokes are optional." John chuckled as Deborah glared through the screen door. "You said that," she barked. "I might have implied it," John said with a shrug. "Freedom of artistic expression. He writes dragon with 5 strokes. He's advanced." Tom beamed. Deborah threw her pen across the table. Their life was messy, chaotic, perfect. Deborah still worked remotely, now a published author of several award-winning papers. Her field, cognitive computation and rural learning methodologies. Inspired, ironically, by Tom's tantrums and the villagers' odd logic. John mostly managed their investments from a tablet he pretended not to use. His biggest move, quietly acquiring shares in a national supercomputing lab, not for power, but to store weather models so he could predict the best tomato harvests. He never told Deborah. Until she accidentally found out. It was a Thursday afternoon. She was looking for an old recipe. Instead, she found a folder labeled, "To DB, use if I die." Curious, she opened it. Inside, documents, legal filings, investment portfolios, ownership shares. One name caught her eye. Tianyun Supercomputing Consortium. She blinked. She clicked. She saw his name under shareholders. Her face went pale. "John?" "Mm-hmm," came his lazy voice from the courtyard, where he was half asleep in the hammock, fanning himself with a newspaper. "What the hell is this?" He peeked one eye open. "Oh, that? Yeah, I meant to tell you. You own a national research facility?" He stretched. "Tiny slice, less than controlling, calm down." "Why would you need that much computing power? For farming?" "I wanted to help you run your neural mesh simulations faster." She blinked. He winked. "Didn't you say you'd manage me? Well, good luck." She marched over and smacked the newspaper out of his hands, then paused, glared, narrowed her eyes. "Draw my bath." He raised a brow. "Is that a request or an academic threat?" "Both." He stood up and walked toward the hose with a grin. Later that evening, their small house flickered with golden lamplight. Tom lay asleep on the couch, arms sprawled, drooling on a picture book titled The History of Seeds. Deborah sat cross-legged on the floor, scribbling equations on her tablet. John returned from the kitchen, holding a plate of watermelon slices. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Somewhere between the faded wood floors, the smell of garlic, and the distant echo of frogs outside, John looked around and realized this wasn't the life he'd planned, it was better. A son with wild pinion and even wilder opinions. A wife who'd once stormed into his life drunk, furious, and burning. A home that had been broken, then rebuilt with muddy boots and laughter. He stepped outside into the garden, barefoot, picked a single ripe tomato. Turned toward the camera. Held it in his palm and said, softly, "Turns out, fattening up your investor was never the point. Letting her take over your life, now that was the real deal."